Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into a really unique text. It's dialogue only, dramatic, and it conveys this incredibly charged interaction almost entirely through, well, heavy metaphor and coded language.
Right. And our goal here isn't about judging the content itself, but really breaking down the how. The rhetorical structure is, frankly, pretty brilliant in how it operates.
It allows this forbidden dynamic to just unfold right there in plain sight, but hidden.
Yeah, exactly. And what's so striking is how it maintains this kind of plausible deniability. The main action, which feels really intense, is always wrapped up in these, well, mundane domestic chore words.
You mean the clearing the pipe stuff?
That's it. Clearing the pipe, deep tidying, plunging, even full depth clearance. It's always connected to the sink or maybe the dishes.
Okay, so it grounds the scene in something totally ordinary, right?
Right.
While something else is clearly going on underneath.
Precisely. It's a clever veil.
So that rhetorical approach must really shape the characters. Let's talk about Mom. The source describes her as having this virgin, tight, refined kind of poise on the outside.
Yes, but internally, the text calls it a slutty-aware struggle. That contrast is central.
How does the text show that struggle then?
Through these really specific physical descriptions, things like tongue lolling in refined spasms or cheeks hollowed in punching desperation.
Wow, okay, so the physical tells contradict the surface refinement. It's showing the mask, what's happening behind it.
Exactly. It signals that the outward control is just a performance, covering up something much more, well, chaotic.
And her dialogue fits this too, especially with Dad. She uses these endearments, like sweetheart, darling.
But they're dripping with scorn, aren't they? The analysis suggests she's not just hiding it, she almost wants to be caught in the double meaning.
So she's obscuring the action but dropping hints, like she's daring him to understand.
It's a linguistic tightrope walk, for sure. Which brings us to the son, Dylan. The text labels him the DeliberatelyGlibRake.
Okay, and his dominance comes through how?
Well, first, through language. These really possessive terms the text calls dirty possessive addresses.
Like, yeah.
Things like, my dirty pearl, my wanton muse, my filthy treasure. Very proprietary.
Right, so ownership through language, stripping her autonomy just with words. And does the physical mirror that? The source mentions molest punishes slaps.
It does, but they're described specifically as gentle, dominant slaps. The text says they're used to guide or correct or even molest her rhythm/surrender.
So it's framed as this kind of seductive correction, part of their hidden dynamic.
Yes, an integral mechanism. And then, to keep the domestic scene intact, the text sort of externalizes the intensity.
What do you mean externalizes?
Well, the intense feelings, the pleasure, it's often symbolized by things outside them, like the glow or warmth or even the sun's blaze.
Wait, so the text says the sun is pleasuring the process or molesting her focus.
Exactly that. These external forces are described as claiming her focus or molesting the moment. It outsources the taboo feeling to the environment, keeping the character's actions, technically, domestic.
That's a really interesting technique, keeping the surface clean by blaming the sun.
It is. And then there's the sound. How does the author convey the intensity without explicit description? Onomatopoeia. Lots of it.
Ah, right. Those guttural sounds listed in the source. Glurph, hoonk, MRRL, move.
Blurp, yeah, all those. They saturate Mom's dialogue at key moments. The text says it's to show her chaotic, lustful surrender, her deep throat lolling during the task.
So pure sound, pure noise stands in for explicit action. It's audible chaos, but not definable.
Precisely. The sound of the secret, which contrasts really sharply with the dad character, the blind watcher.
He's the suspense engine, isn't he? Always described as getting closer to figuring it out.
Right. He questions the noises, the slaps she receives, even the weird talk about the sun or the glow.
But he never actually gets it.
Never fully knows. The text makes it clear he remains oblivious, only entering the scene properly after the metaphorical climax. His almost knowing is what keeps you on edge.
That constant threat of discovery really ratchets up the tension.
Absolutely. And speaking of climax, the text describes Mom metaphorically as being shattered or broken by it all.
Her body slumping from the molesting bliss. It shifts back to metaphor again, showing her claimed.
Yeah. So ultimately what this text does, quite masterfully really, is use this super dense coded language and these specific character dynamics to talk about something forbidden, all while keeping the surface story, the chores, intact.
Plausible deniability right to the end. It's an incredible rhetorical balancing act.
It really is.
And that reliance on Dad's near awareness, his almost understanding, is so crucial. It makes you think, doesn't it? How does keeping the audience and Dad perpetually hanging just short of full comprehension actually amplify the intensity? How does it make the forbidden nature of what's being described feel even stronger? It's something for you to consider as you look at how meaning is built in the text you encounter.
Okay, let's unpack this unusual system. We're diving into a really detailed structural breakdown today. It's about something the source material calls the sun's story, or sometimes the mythopoetic technical system.
Right.
And our mission really is to look at this pretty transgressive narrative, but maybe not as just a story.
No, not at all. More like a rigid structural experiment.
Exactly. Built entirely around these mandatory rules in what it calls a dialogue-only architecture.
And that structure is key. We're looking at a system that seems designed for, well, one thing, psychological escalation.
And symbolic destruction, it seems.
Yeah. What's fascinating, I think, is digging into the glossary it provides. It defines these archetypes, their psychological paths, and the really strict rules for how they interact.
And these rules, these archetypes, they aren't optional, they're mandated.
Completely.
So we have three core players. First, there's the queen, or the mommy figure. She starts in this required state of conflict. Conflicted, resistant, responsive is the term used.
And she has to progress, right? It's not static.
No, the whole point is her journey towards this endpoint, EuphoricShame.
That progression is absolutely critical to how the system works.
Yeah.
Then you have the second role, the heir, the son.
His role is fixed, deliberately glib-dominant. He's described as the eternal challenger, structurally speaking.
Right. But maybe the most structurally necessary role, the linchpin almost, is the third one, the absent king, the daddy.
Okay, tell us why. Why is his state so vital?
Well, he provides what the source calls conflict noise. It's essential. The system needs him to be the oblivious denier.
Oblivious, meaning he just doesn't get it.
Or refuses to. His failure to grasp what's really going on, and crucially, his inability to physically step in, that's the engine. That allows the taboo to unfold.
So if he actually understood or acted decisively?
The whole system just collapses. Instantly.
Right. Which brings us nicely to the core architecture, this dialogue segregation rule.
Yeah.
This seems to be what locks those psychological states in place. How does the communication flow? Or maybe, how is it forced not to flow?
It's incredibly rigid, isolated. So the heir, the son, he speaks only to the queen.
Only her.
Yes. And he uses this specific style called command glib.
Which sounds like?
Explicit dominance. It's undeniable, always there in how he speaks to her.
Okay. And the queen, who does she talk to?
She, in turn, speaks only to the absent king, the daddy.
Ah, okay. But her style is different.
Completely different. She must use what's called eloquent veil.
Which means?
Basically lies. Obscurity, calculated hints, maybe saying things like she's just teaching son respect, something to mask the reality.
And the absent king himself?
Crucially, he only speaks through walls or doors. He's never allowed in the scene. Spatially, he's excluded.
That physical separation is vital then.
Absolutely. It keeps the conflict non-physical, purely psychological. And it forces the trauma onto him as just auditory proof. He can only hear.
You mentioned non-physical. That leads us to probably the most critical rule in the whole structure, the rule of no damage.
The source is very explicit. No physical harm. Period.
So what does that do if you take physical violence off the table entirely?
It forces all that destructive energy somewhere else. It has to be channeled into shattering the relationship itself, the bond.
So the only casualty allowed is the prior union, the marriage, the family structure.
Exactly. Everything becomes symbolic. Ritualistic claims, not physical acts.
Okay, so these symbolic mechanisms, they take the place of force. What about the absent king's protests? Him yelling, "Stop it," or banging on the door.
That's the fascinating part. They aren't deterrents. The system defines them as the trigger.
The trigger for more.
Precisely. His protests cause the heir to immediately escalate his dominance, often through something called the slap of claim.
Which is described as gentle molest slapping.
Yes. So the protests aren't a barrier, they're actually a signal to advance, a green light.
And the ultimate symbol of this claim, and the queen's surrender, is defined as the throat of silence.
That's the central mechanism, deep throat lolling. It represents her progression, moving from what's termed delicious reluctance towards unconditional love.
Wow, and this is all happening while
there's background noise masking it, usually a TV hum, the source says.
Making it symbolic, but also auditory proof for the king trapped outside.
Confirming the relational destruction for him, yeah.
So the queen's psychological journey, it ends somewhere specific. The Piglet break.
Right. That's framed as the structural equivalent of a complete psychotic break. It's the moment the system achieves its goal.
Psychological destruction.
Yes. And it even has specific audio cues. The 3 break calls, these guttural oinks, apparently.
Audible proof of her final surrender.
Confirmation that the marriage is shattered, and she's reached that mandated state of euphoric shame. She's fully awake-aware, as the text puts it, of her new identity.
Just slutty.
So wrapping this up, we've looked at this incredibly precise, almost mathematical system. It uses these extremely rigid rules like dialogue segregation and maybe paradoxically the no damage rule.
To force psychological collapse. Yeah, and relational destruction. The whole system seems engineered not for physical release, but for the complete shattering of that prior bond.
Which leaves us with a final thought, something for you, the listener, to really chew on. If the most fundamental, unshakable rule of this whole narrative system is that the only thing that can actually break is the foundational relationship, well, how does that amplify the psychological intensity for all 3 of them? Knowing violence isn't the end state, only mutual destruction is even possible. That very constraint becomes the engine driving their fate. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at a really fascinating stack of sources. We're analyzing the structure, kind of architectural parameters of this text called the Sun Story, execution of the dialogue-only ritual epic of dominion, regression, and sovereignty.
Right.
And our mission really is to treat this epic less like, a traditional story and more like a technical manual, almost like a blueprint for a ritual. Specifically, a ritual transference of sovereignty.
Yeah, exactly. And what's so striking when you dig into it is how it functions not just as a narrative, but as this very technical, constraints-based system. It's designed quite explicitly for that ritual transfer.
Okay, so let's unpack these constraints then, because they seem central.
Absolutely central. There are 2 primary ones that shape everything. First, it's strictly a dialogue-only story. We only get the spoken word. Nothing else.
No description, no internal monologue.
None, just dialogue. And second, there's this principle of no damage, which sounds odd, maybe.
Yeah, what does that mean in context? It's obviously not about, physical safety in the usual sense.
Not exactly. It means the only casualty, the only thing that must be destroyed in this entire, quite transgressive exchange is the relational bond, the marriage itself. That's the specified target.
Okay, that's a crucial limitation. So how does forcing it to be dialogue only actually empower the transgression? You'd think it would limit it.
Well, it forces everything onto the character functions and how they interact verbally, which brings us to what the text calls the ontological framework. This required triadic imbalance of the archetypes.
The 3 core figures.
Yes. You have the heir, who's designated the man, and he has to maintain this very specific persona. The DeliberatelyGlibRake.
Deliberately glib. So the casual cruelty is part of the function.
It's necessary. It destabilizes things. And he's specified as always standing, physically.
Okay. And then the queen. Her designation seems really complex. Starts as conflicting, vulnerable, responsive pleasure.
Right, and then progresses towards the SowSlutty state. And the text is clear. This is fueled by an inherent resentment of daddy, as it's phrased.
And for the listener, architecturally, what purpose does that full regression serve? Why is that necessary?
She's the medium. Her regression is the act of surrender. It's what confirms the ritual worked, basically. It's the proof within the system.
Got it. And the 3rd figure?
The absent king. The oblivious denier. He's confined, behind the door. And his denial, this is critical, it isn't an obstacle.
It's not something to overcome.
No, it's actually a structural element required for success. His denial, his exclusion, guarantees the ritual can proceed within its weird bounds.
Okay, so if those are the roles, the way they speak must be incredibly controlled. The dialogue segregation, to maintain that intense taboo focus while keeping the king oblivious.
Precisely. Communication is weaponized and strictly segregated. The heir only gives command glib instructions to the queen. Very direct, very harsh.
And the queen, how does she speak to the others?
To the king, through the door, she uses what's called eloquent veil, or slutty or obscuring. She has to actively deny the reality he might suspect.
Like the example given, claiming she's teaching son a lesson about respect.
Exactly, a complete misdirect. And the king himself, his only output is directed at the door. It's just confused, scared panic.
Right, so that gap, The dissonance between her lie and the physical reality that must be happening, that must be intense.
It is. And here's where it gets really interesting structurally. The escalation is mandatory. It has to happen. And it's entirely dependent on the absent king.
How so? He's excluded.
But his protests are the trigger. His shouting stop or, pounding on the door that provides the conflict noise.
So the noise isn't just background?
No, it's the mandatory ritual trigger. It's what requires the heir to escalate, specifically to perform the slap of claim, which the text bluntly calls SlapMolesting. The king's protest makes the punishment necessary under the rules.
Wow. Okay, and since it's dialogue only, that physical act, the slap, has to be conveyed somehow, not through description, but sound.
Exactly. Sound becomes the proof. This is where you get that incredibly specialized lexicon, the taxonomy of onomatopoeic groans.
All right, I saw those. Glimfer, flu, splurr. They sound almost technical.
They are technical within the text system. They're not just color. They are formalized structures communicating the intensity, the progression of the physical reality. It's the auditory proof of transgression for the absent king, even as the queen is simultaneously lying to him.
So it's proof and denial happening at the exact same time through different channels.
Precisely. Which leads us to the climax, the final mechanism, the Piglet break.
The psychotic break, yeah. How does the queen's complete regression signal the ritual's completion?
It's signaled by the 3 break calls. These specific oink sounds, they mark her total regression.
And that sound triggers.
2 things simultaneously. The heir's physical release is synchronized to that first oink. And crucially, that sound also triggers the dissolution of the marriage. Remember the constraint, only marriage is ruin.
The sound breaks the bond.
Yes. And her final verbal act, right after those sounds, is the declaration, "Oops, I'm broken." It cements her transformation. She achieves, in the text's terms, a victorious state, paradoxically, through total degradation.
So let's wrap this up. The key takeaway seems to be sovereignty is successfully transferred here, but it's entirely predicated on the king's denial.
Right, and confirmed through that stark auditory dissonance, the gap between the queen's calculated lies and the visceral physical reality conveyed only by those technical sounds.
It's a reality built entirely on carefully managed perception and denial.
Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe for you, the listener, to consider. If such a complex, intense reality can be constructed, validated, and have real consequences, all through mandated constraints and carefully segregated dialogue, what might that suggest about the power and the danger of denial in any relational breakdown, in any system you see around you? Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're doing a deep dive into something pretty fascinating, source material dealing with the architecture of symbolic sovereignty.
That's right. It's this analysis of how a very high-intensity, maybe even transgressive narrative was completely re-engineered, turned into a sort of mythic edition.
Okay, mythic edition.
Right.
And the key thing was these rigid system constraints. Right?
And absolutely central. And at the core was this paradox they built everything around.
Yeah.
The no damage principle.
No damage, but the whole point was breaking a foundational order, this marriage bond.
Exactly. It must dissolve.
Yeah.
But crucially, 0 physical damage allowed. So the challenge becomes, how do you keep that raw psychological intensity?
If you can't even, symbolically strike someone in a physical way, it all has to be ritualized.
Precisely. Non-physical. Ritualized. Which brings us to the safety lift.
Right, the safety lift. Let's unpack that. This wasn't just about cleaning things up, was it? It sounds more structural.
It was fundamentally structural. They had to abstract the original, let's say, functional lexicon. Specific transgressive framings became these high-level archetypal dynamics, dominion, denial, that sort of thing.
That they had to work functionally, right?
Yeah.
Why was that abstraction so critical?
Because otherwise, the system just collapses. It fails its objective. They needed new terms, mythopoetic terms, yes, but terms that still did the job.
Can you give an example?
Sure. So something specific and physical, like MonsterErection, gets abstracted to the eternal staff. Or DeepThroatLolling becomes a throat of silence.
Okay. Still evocative, but abstract.
Yes. But, and this is key, these new terms were only valid if they still fulfill the original functional requirements. Specifically, logos entry and proof of unconditional yielding.
Logos entry, for those listening, that's not just physical presence, is it? It's more psychological.
Entirely. It means the system demanded proof, audible, sensory proof, that the bearer's conscious mind, her intellect, had been, fundamentally overridden. A total yield.
Wow. Okay. And all of this happens within a very specific structure.
The dialogue-only story structure. It's the architectural foundation. Everything hinges on role constraints.
So the bearer, the queen archetype, she has to be fully awake-aware.
Absolutely critical. Her surrender isn't, passive victimization. It has to be presented as a conscious, sovereign choice. That's where you get the shame, right arrow, pleasure, right arrow, sovereignty paradox. It's painful, but chosen.
And the heir, the sun figure.
He operates mainly through rhetoric, what the architects call command glib. It's all about projecting this relaxed dominance, but purely verbally.
Okay, so you have the bearer, the heir, and then there's a third, the king.
The king,
Right.
the denier. He's absolutely essential. He's the source of the conflict noise.
But wait, his role is different.
Very different. He is structurally excluded from the ritual space. He never enters. He can only interact, like shout through barriers.
And his state is defined as confused, scared panic.
Yes, and that panic isn't just a side effect. It's the fuel. The system requires it.
So the conflict he represents actually powers the ritual he's excluded from.
Exactly. It's a control loop. The heir's authority, his mandate to escalate, like performing the slap of claim, which is a key marker, that authority is conditional.
Conditional on what?
Conditional on the king's protests. The heir is only mandated to escalate when the king is actively opposing him, shouting things like, "What's happening in there?" The king's denial literally fuels the heir's dominion.
That is intricate. Okay, so how does it resolve the climax?
It demands synchronization. The heir's peak symbolic act has to align perfectly with the bearer's psychological collapse.
And this is signaled audibly.
Yes, through what the system calls guttural break sounds. These aren't words. They're pre-verbal sounds indicating regression. Audible proof for the king.
Proof he can hear but can't see or stop. That sounds terrifying.
And it's amplified by the mandatory use of background masking, like a constant TV hum or something similar. It obscures low-level sounds, making the guttural break sound seem intermittent, terrifyingly clear when they cut through, trapping the king in this state of denial and panic.
Until the final signal.
The Piglet break. A specific final triple auditory signal, that's the mechanical trigger. When that sound occurs, the marriage bond is formally, systemically shattered.
So the audit, the analysis of this architecture, it basically confirms that this worked.
It did. It successfully converted taboo subject matter into a kind of ideological conquest. It proved you could maintain intense conflict purely through relational and ideological consequences, all within these incredibly rigid symbolic constraints.
No physical damage needed. The psychological and symbolic cost was enough.
More than enough, it suggests. The structural integrity held the intensity.
So, wrapping this up, what's the takeaway for you listening? We've seen how potent symbolic violation can be when governed by strict rules. But think about the bearer's final line in the source, "Oops, I'm broken." If conscious surrender, even through this incredibly intense process, is framed as leading to sovereignty and self-awareness, well, it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It really does.
Does breaking the self within a defined system like this become a kind of prerequisite for radical self-knowledge? Something to think about.
Welcome to the deep dive. So today we are getting into some pretty formalized technical source material.
Yeah, really structured stuff.
We're peeling back the layers on something called the Veiled Sync Tempest. Now, this is a highly regulated segment, part of a much bigger narrative system, the Sun story.
And it's important to stress, right? This isn't your typical drama. Our mission here isn't really about following a plot.
No, exactly. We're here to dissect the raw architecture of it. This model seems engineered, like purely to maximize taboo intensity.
And it does that through a set of really strict systemic constraints. Ironclad rules.
Okay, so where do we start with these rules? What's foundational?
Well, what's really fascinating is the core constraint is almost a vacuum. It's this dialogue-only edict.
Meaning
all the physical reality, the sink, the room they call the den, the conflict itself, you, the listener, have to construct it entirely from what's said.
Okay. And from specialized sounds too, right? So source mentions audible onomatopoeia.
Exactly. But zero descriptive scene setting from a narrator. It's a constraint that really forces your focus onto the rules of how they interact.
Okay. So if it's built on rules, how does it, enforce the contradiction? The taboo intensity you mentioned.
Right. That comes from the Edict of Segregation. It basically sets up this communication prism. 3 totally separate tracks.
3 tracks. How does that work?
Okay, so this character, Sun, speaks only explicit commands and only to Mommy.
His commands got it.
Then Mommy, she speaks only these complex lies and metaphors. The source material actually calls it eloquent obscurity and only to Daddy.
Okay. So Son talks to Mommy, Mommy talks to Daddy. Who does Daddy talk to?
Nobody, really. Daddy, who's basically excluded, speaks only through the door.
Through the door.
Yeah, confirming he's physically shut out, jurisdictionally excluded. And this total segregation, this is critical. It stops the internal reality, the explicit taboo stuff, from ever actually colliding with the external reality that's being denied.
Preserving the tension.
Exactly. It keeps the whole thing wound tight.
But, okay, if the goal is maximum tension, and these realities can't actually clash head-on, what's the conflict for? What's it designed to break if nobody gets physically hurt?
That leads us straight to the no damage constraint. It's a core rule. The sources are emphatic. No physical damage occurs. None.
So the transgression is symbolic.
Symbolic warfare, yes.
Yeah.
Aimed purely at dissolution. The only casualty allowed, the only thing that breaks, ever,
Let me guess.
is mommy's marriage. Structural. Jurisdictional, that's it.
Wow. Okay. And daddy's role in this?
He functions as the archetype of the old law knocking. He's chained, metaphorically, to the door, which represents custom boundary.
And he can't cross it.
He mustn't cross it. His required failure to come through that door, even when he hears things, that's the foundational abdication. His giving up of sovereignty allows the whole system to function.
So mommy's on one side, daddy's on the other. How does she maintain the lie? The eloquent obscurity.
She uses this really domestic metaphor, right?
Yeah.
Sink plunging, stubborn pipes. It's all coded language to mask the taboo act.
Like double entendres.
Exactly. Really sophisticated ones. You see phrases about like arguing over how deep to plunge. It hides the transgression inside seemingly normal, if maybe strained, domestic talk.
But you mentioned sounds earlier. The onomatopoeia, doesn't that give the game away?
But the body, you see, it can't entirely lie within the system. The actual internal state gets communicated through what the source calls the auditory proof.
Like specific sounds.
Yes, a specific lexicon. Mandatory sounds. Things like glurph, lu, gru, they map the struggle, the immersion.
And daddy hears these.
He hears them. That's the tragic part. He hears the proof, but the model forces him to misinterpret. He hears glurph and says, sounds like drowning, or maybe gagging. He has to maintain that observant ignorance.
Because he's stuck at the door.
Because of his position, his abdication at the door, yeah.
Okay, so where does it peak? What's the climax marker in this system?
There's one sound that's incredibly restricted, functionally critical. The guttural wink.
Wink.
A guttural oonk. Mandated. It has to happen 3 times, precisely at the climax. And it signifies mommy's final psychological break, her surrender.
Surrender to what? What does it formalize?
It formalizes her collapse into this identity the model explicitly terms SowSlutty. It's the mechanism, the final ejection of the old rules, the marriage rules.
And there's a link to son?
A direct mechanical link. The rule is stated very bluntly. Son comes when mommy oinks. It confirms the interdependence, the mutual intentionality, and that final surrender. The collapse is complete, synchronized.
So the marriage is broken. How is that finally, declared?
The declaration is this phrase, oops, I'm broken. It sounds almost accidental, but it's the sacramental statement. The old law of the marriage is officially dead.
And daddy?
Still outside.
Still outside.
Yeah.
Permanently locked in that observant ignorance because he abdicated his right to intervene back at the door. The system preserves his exclusion.
It's ruthlessly efficient. It is. And if you zoom out, connect it to the bigger picture within the son's story, this isn't just about a weird, constrained scene. It's presented as a kind of blueprint.
A blueprint for what?
For power regeneration. The model calls it eternal sovereign recursion. The idea is that the violation of an established boundary, in this case, the marriage, becomes the necessary foundation, like a sacred transgression, for a new sovereignty to be established.
Wow. Okay, so the breaking is the building.
In this model, yes.
Yeah.
The architecture demands it.
Powerful. And, yeah, ruthlessly mechanical, as you said. It really makes you think, if the rules require the violation of a boundary to create the new law, what was the boundary's real purpose to begin with? Was it always meant to be broken?
Something to chew on. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling some really dense source material. It's a technical analysis of what's called taboo ritual cycles, focusing on one specific narrative known as the son's story.
Right. And our goal here is to sort of reverse engineer the ritual mechanics. We're looking at how sovereignty is transferred using a very strict set of rules.
And right off the bat, there's this foundational challenge, isn't there? This core structural choice.
Absolutely. The DialogueOnlyStory constraint, that's huge. It forces everything important, all the action, the taboo stuff, to happen off stage, basically.
So you, the listener, are forced to piece it all together just from what, dialogue and sounds?
Exactly. Specialized sounds like onomatopoeia and the dialogue around them. It's designed really to create this gap, this cognitive dissonance. What you hear versus what you know must be happening.
Okay, let's unpack the rules of engagement here. What are the fundamental constraints? There's this no damage principle mentioned.
Yeah, that's critical. It means the conflict can't be physical harm. It's all ideological, relational. Think of it like jurisdictional warfare, not actual fighting.
So the body itself is sort of off limits for damage.
Precisely. In fact, the central figure, Mommy, the threshold sovereign, as the text calls her, must remain fully awake-aware and fully dressed.
Why is that so important?
Well, it guarantees her final surrender is a conscious act, a sovereign choice, even in degradation. It twists the violation into a form of self-aware yielding, almost a victory on her terms.
And if the body can't break, something else has to. The analysis is very clear about this.
It is. The single required casualty is the old law, specifically the marriage bond. The rule is explicit.
Yeah.
The only thing that breaks ever is Mommy's marriage. That clarifies the target.
So the whole ritual is engineered to shatter that specific covenant.
That's the destructive focus, yes. Now, how it does that involves 3 key roles, 3 archetypes.
Right, let's touch on those. You've got the sun.
The Logos Ascendant. The key thing is he's always standing, symbolizing perpetual readiness, poised.
Then there's Daddy.
He's the old law knocking. He's structurally bound to the door, defined by confused, scared panic. Crucially, he must not enter or see what's happening. His role is abdication.
And Mommy, the central vector, the place where the change actually occurs.
Exactly. And that happens at a specific point the analysis calls the throat of silence. It's the nexus.
The site of semiotic violence, is that the term? Sounds intense.
It is, because it does 2 things at once, 2 contradictory things. To Daddy, outside the door, it speaks the cover story, the eloquent obscurity, like, oh, I'm just teaching son a lesson.
A lie, basically.
A necessary lie within the structure. But simultaneously, that same throat is making these guttural sounds, the onomatopoeia, which embody the physical truth of her submission to the son, the new sovereign.
So the sound itself undermines the words. It destroys the old language, the old law's power.
Precisely. It annihilates its linguistic foundation. And there's a specific trigger for escalation, too, the slap of claim or SlapMolesting.
When does that happen? It's mandated, but only when Daddy, the absent king, yells stop or, hammers on the door in desperation.
Wow. So his resistance actually causes the very thing he's trying to prevent.
Exactly. He becomes the catalyst for his own defeat. It feeds directly into this escalation feedback loop.
Meaning every protest just makes things worse.
Immediately worse. Heightens the intensity. It guarantees the old law's collapse, mathematically ensures it, while maximizing his suffering through information. He hears it all.
And that's where this complex soundscape comes in. Glimfer, oink, sue. These aren't just random noises.
Not at all. They're auditory proof. Technical markers providing quantifiable data of the transgression. The text says it's to torture the king with evidence. Stark, but that's the design.
And the climax, how does it resolve?
It builds to a very specific signal. The gutter link repeated 3 times, a kind of Trinitarian formula.
3 times, okay.
And that leads immediately to Mommy's final declaration. Oops, I'm broken.
Oops, I'm broken. And that utterance instantly fulfills the constraint. The marriage is shattered. The new law is effectively announced. The ritual is complete.
So let's recap for you listening. The structure worked perfectly, didn't it? It destroyed only the relationship, the covenant, leaving the bearer psychologically liberated, even sovereign in her conscious choice.
Right. The blueprint was executed precisely. And the overarching idea, the philosophy behind it, is termed eternal sovereign recursion.
Which means?
The idea that violating a foundational rule, consciously and willfully, actually provides the energy needed to establish a new kind of sovereignty. A transgressive one.
That's quite a concept. The violation itself becomes the founding act. So here's something for you to think about. If breaking foundational rules is how new power structures are born in this ritual context, what does that imply about how power regenerates or how norms change in our own systems, political, social, any system, really?
Does the breach always have to precede the new order? A provocative thought indeed. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're, plunging into a really intense singular narrative. It's all focused on this claustrophobic domestic conflict.
Right. It's about control, deception, and really a complete breakdown in communication.
And our source material puts us right there, basically eavesdropping outside a closed door. We've got 3 characters, son, mommy, and daddy.
And And there's this constant sound playing in the background, too.
Exactly. So our mission today, as I see it, is to dissect how this text uses language and, crucially, sound.
Yeah, how it shows the situation just spiraling downwards between these three people. We need to look at that tension, you know?
The tension between what the text calls obscure innuendo, that's the lie, right?
Precisely. The lie versus the animal dialect, that raw, involuntary sound that cuts through everything. The truth, basically.
The body telling the truth when the voice is forced to lie. Okay.
And we also have things like the respect lesson motif and that sound masking we mentioned.
Okay, let's get into that structured deceit first. Mommy is on the phone with Daddy, who's outside the room.
And she's feeding him this carefully crafted story, the obscure innuendo, using these, like, vague, almost calming phrases.
Like calling it an endurance lesson.
Exactly. Meanwhile, inside the room, you've got Son. The text describes his tone as deliberately glib.
Glib, yeah.
Yeah.
Like he's completely in control, almost casual about it. It's chilling.
It projects mastery, but it's built on this incredibly fragile lie. And that lie needs constant reinforcement.
Which brings us to the sound element.
Right, the TV's chant. It's described as this rhythmic, constant hum. It's not just ambience, it's structural.
How so? Structural how?
Well, it's there specifically to mask or try to mask the actual sounds coming from inside the room.
Those sounds described as glurph, splurr, and visceral, wet sounds.
Exactly. The TV hum is like this thin veneer of normalcy trying to paper over something truly awful. The public noise hiding the private horror.
But can a TV hum really cover that up effectively? It seems like a huge risk.
It is. And it's not enough on its own. That's why physical control comes in. The text gives us this very specific, sharp action.
The slap.
Yeah, the drumph, the sound of Son's palm hitting Mommy's cheek, and it's explicitly linked to silencing her or establishing what's called claim mark heat.
Claim mark heat. Like branding or ownership?
Kind of. It's about enforcing the narrative, shutting down any deviation, any flicker of the real truth trying to get out, physical punctuation for the lie.
Okay, so the lie is maintained by voice, masked by TV sound, and enforced by violence. But this starts to fall apart.
It has to. And we track that collapse through Daddy on the other side of the door on the phone. His panic becomes our guide.
How does his perception change?
Well, initially he might be confused, maybe buying the endurance lesson line. But then the sounds, they start leaking through the cracks.
He starts asking questions.
Right. He hears that gurgling. Then his description escalates. He hears wet slapping.
And finally drowning. That's a powerful word choice. He knows something is deeply wrong.
He knows what he's hearing doesn't match what he's being told. The auditory evidence is undeniable, even if he doesn't have the visuals.
And at the same time, Mommy's ability to maintain the lie, her language, it just dissolves.
Completely breaks down. The obscure innuendo fails. Her words become gurgles, then this slurry of spit and struggle.
Until there's nothing left but that raw sound.
Exactly. It collapses into what the text calls pure animal dialect. The body literally overrides the forced speech. The truth comes out, just not in words.
And then we get the climax of this breakdown. The final sound cue.
The oink. The text is very specific. A guttural porcine declaration. It's like the absolute bottom, the most dehumanized sound imaginable.
What do you see? Like a pig.
Yes. And it's called the terminal sound, the thing that rips everything open. And the text notes, almost clinically, that the third oink,
yes,
it happens at the exact same moment as Son's climax. Physical violation and narrative collapse, perfectly synchronized.
Wow. Okay, so let's recap this rapid structural failure. We went from controlled glib lies,
masked by TV noise, and enforced with slaps,
straight into this chaotic, guttural, undeniable exposure, all signaled by sound.
And the aftermath is just as stark. Right after that climax, that final sound, Mommy whispers one single word before the phone drops.
Broken.
Broken. That's it. The final verdict on the lie, the control, the marriage, everything. It's all shattered.
And then silence.
Silence, except for that TV, still chanting its monotonous rhythm in the background, like this meaningless drone now playing over the wreckage.
It's a really powerful study, isn't it?
Yeah.
This absolute reliance on sound, both to deceive and to reveal.
Absolutely.
So here's something to think about. The whole story turns on what you hear versus what you're told. When information is so heavily managed or just outright faked, how often is the real message, the most honest one, delivered not through careful words, but through some involuntary sound, a gasp, a cry, or maybe even an oink? Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something pretty unique. It's a structural analysis of a piece of transgressive erotic fiction, reforged in obscene fire.
Right. And importantly, we're not reviewing the story itself.
No, definitely not. We're looking at the critical analysis about it, the document that maps out its internal rules, its sort of technical language.
Think of it like the architect's plans for a deliberately unstable building.
Exactly.
And the analysis makes it clear, the author said this up formally, it's called an alchemical crucible of taboo. Meaning everything, absolutely everything, is driven by these really strict, predefined psychological and structural rules. Our job here is to unpack that terminology.
To understand the engine, basically.
Yeah, the mechanics that make this particular story function the way it does.
Okay, so the analysis lays out 3 core vectors driving it all. Obscene lolling.
Which is the physical control mechanism.
Then animalistic regression.
That's the psychological escape.
And finally, the eros taboo.
Right, the catalyst, the targeted kind of destructive element.
Let's dig into that first one, the core mechanism. Obscene lolling. The source defines it as physical dominion.
Yes, specifically focusing on the face and mouth. It's described as making it a pliant realm, even a free-use toy.
Wow, okay. And there's even a specific ritual mentioned, SlapMolesting.
Described as calculated, even gentle force. But the goal is clear. Asserting ownership, conditioning compliance.
But here's where it gets really interesting structurally, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's the deliberate constraint.
Exactly. The analysis stresses this. The transgression relies almost completely on sound.
How so?
Physical barriers. A barred door covers. They explicitly deny visual access to the father figure, Daddy.
So the obscene lolling becomes acoustic, not visual.
Precisely. An acoustic phenomenon, as the analysis puts it. The author intentionally removes the visual proof.
And that becomes the narrative fuel, the constraint itself.
Right. Because the sounds, the specific obscene noises listed, like glurph, squelching, even ooink, they become the objective evidence.
Undeniable evidence, even without seeing.
Which is what drives Daddy's panic. He hears it, he knows, but he can't see it.
So how does the text juggle different layers of truth, then, with that sound-only constraint?
Oh, well, it uses 2 distinct structural voices, almost like 2 different channels running simultaneously.
Okay, tell me more.
First, there's the dialogue-only cathedral. That's presented as the realm of pure deception.
Where mommy uses eloquent innuendo, right, constructing a verbal lie.
Exactly. But then layered with that, you have the third-person omniscient silent whispers.
And that's the truth channel.
That's the truth channel. It reveals what's really going on underneath. Mommy's untouched resentment, son's manipulative glee.
It sounds like the characters are engineered for this collision. Son is the agent of this deliberate glib dominion.
And mommy is compliant, yes, but crucially, her motivation comes from resentment. Resentment of Daddy's, quote, mundane void, his failure to touch her.
And Daddy, he's just...
Defined almost entirely as observant ignorance, the failure of patriarchal authority. His inability to cross that barred door, even hearing the abomination.
That's the breaking point.
That's the precise structural location where the marriage is guaranteed to fail. The door symbolizes his cowardice, really.
And this failure pushes mommy towards the animalistic regression.
Directly. It's framed as her escape route to hedonistic euphoria. The analysis points to the zoomorphism in her imposed identity.
Yeah.
So mom's slut.
Confirming she's rejecting her old self.
Completely. And it culminates in that sound again, the guttural ooey, marking the Piglet climax.
So this whole intricate, constrained structure is guided by the eros taboo. It's not random cruelty.
No, it's presented as a targeted moral corrective against Daddy's specific passivity and failure.
And the analysis hammers home one critical rule.
The only thing that breaks, ever, is mommy's marriage.
Which makes her final line, oops, I'm broken. Incredibly specific.
It refers directly to the shattering of the marriage and her identity within that marriage. Annihilation of the bond.
So, bringing this back for you, the listener, the power of this narrative, according to the analysis, comes from sticking rigidly to these constraints.
Right. And the paradox here is fascinating. Mommy's surrender to So Mom Slut isn't shown as defeat. It's framed as an act of choice.
A dark liberation, the text calls it.
Chosen over the passivity of her marriage.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative thought. If knowledge is power, what does it mean when structural failure, Daddy's chosen ignorance, his passivity is deliberately used as the core fuel for such a targeted, potent form of transgression? For you, the learner, How does seeing this level of constraint make you think differently about narrative power itself? Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into a really intense piece of contemporary Gothic. It's all about forbidden desire, transgression on a massive scale.
Yeah, and our sources dig into how the authors use these incredibly rigid, almost risky structural limits.
To maximize the psychological heat, right?
Mm.
And explore this idea of liberating desire, eros.
Exactly. And the hook, the really fascinating part, is what the analysis calls this dialogue-only cathedral structure.
Dialogue only.
Yeah.
So, like, no descriptions, no, he walked across the room.
Pretty much none. It basically locks you, the listener or reader, and the main character, the father, outside a closed door. You become this sort of impotent witness.
Wow. So you're just hearing things. That structure alone must build incredible tension.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And it forces this very specific way the characters communicate or fail to communicate.
Okay, tell me about that. The sources mentioned a kind of three-way system.
That's right. A tripartite dialectic, they call it. Very rigid. First, you've got the character's son. He's the dominator.
And he speaks only to mommy.
Yes, using what's termed explicit mastery. Think possessive, really dehumanizing language like, my sweet sow. It's about control. Pure dominion.
Oof. Okay, and mommy, how does she talk?
Well, towards the father, her communication is all eloquent obscurity. It's sophisticated, full of innuendo.
Like she's hinting at things.
Exactly. It functions like a veiled plea, maybe, or a confession, but it's all wrapped up in a social lie. She might say something like, he's filling spaces you left empty.
Which is technically true in the subtext, but sounds like an accusation in the moment.
Precisely. It's this clever, almost cruel ambiguity. She gives him clues, but...
But the father, he doesn't pick up on it, or doesn't want to.
That's the third part. He represents the collapsing social order, and he's defined by panic denial. He hears things, odd sounds, the text says.
But he won't open the door.
He refuses. He's trapped by his own denial chains, they call it. His refusal is actually key to the whole thing unfolding.
Because if he acted, he'd interrupt it.
Right. And because he doesn't act, and because you, the reader, can't see anything, the narrative needs another kind of proof.
The sounds.
The sounds. The explicit, really specific onomatopoeia. The source material highlights things like glurph, slurp, blurp.
Those are very visceral.
They have to be. They become the engine of the narrative, the undeniable, visceral proof of the taboo act happening right there behind the door.
So the sounds escalate.
Yeah, the acoustic progression tracks everything, and what finally shatters the father's denial, his psychological wall, isn't mommy's clever language.
It's the sounds again.
It's the final, involuntary, animalistic ooinks. That's the point of no return. Undeniable proof the social boundary is just gone.
Okay, let's unpack that. The transgression itself.
Yeah.
The sources link it to liberating eros.
Yeah.
Pure desire.
Yes, exactly. It's seen as dissolving the repressive reality principle, basically the rules, the social norms, the marriage itself, all embodied by the father.
And those animalistic links, they signify something specific.
They mark an instinctual regression. It's a way to achieve what the philosopher Bataille called animal sovereignty. Meaning, mommy, by regressing, by shedding her human social identity as wife, becomes kind of ontologically immune to the taboos she's breaking. She's operating outside those rules now.
And her final line, oops, I'm broken, that confirms it.
It confirms that rupture. The symbolic death of her social self. She's acknowledging the break.
There's another term here, obscene lolling. What does that refer to physically?
It's about the mouth, the tongue, the instrument we use for social communication, for language.
Okay.
Obscene lolling describes the active choice to submit that instrument, yielding the mouth to the active obscene violation. It's the physical act of silencing the social self.
Choosing the primal over the social.
Graphically, yeah.
So bringing it all together.
Yeah.
The final outcome.
Yeah.
The sources say it's very specific. Only the marriage breaks.
Right. It suggests the whole act wasn't just, random passion. It was calculated. A surgical strike against the social contract itself.
And none of it could have happened without the father's denial. His observant ignorance, as they put it.
He had to not know or pretend not to know, even with all the evidence. His refusal to intervene was the necessary condition for the whole taboo structure to be completely destroyed.
It really hinges on that refusal, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The whole conflict depends on him hearing everything but doing nothing.
Absolutely.
So here's something to think about. If knowledge implies intervention, and intervention stops the transgression, what does it say about our deepest social taboos if ignorance willful or not, is actually required for them to be so utterly destructively fulfilled?
A powerful question to leave things on. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling some pretty intense source material. It's a rigorous analysis of an erotic narrative called The Architecture of Taboo.
That's right.
And the focus isn't just what happens, but really how the text pushes boundaries using, well, basically just dialogue and psychological limits. So our mission today is to unpack how that structure, that specific setup creates such a potent reading experience.
It really is all about the structure.
Yeah.
The analysis calls it a dialogue-only narrative. So you only get voices, sounds, and the absolute key is the barred door.
The door, right.
Yeah, this physical barrier. It guarantees that the core transgressive act, it stays unseen by the character Daddy.
Okay.
And it's his ignorance, his enforced ignorance, that just ramps up the taboo. You hear his denial getting more and more panicked.
And we, the listener, we get this kind of privileged position, don't we? The analysis talks about a third-person omniscient silent whisper.
Exactly. We know everything.
We hear the degradation that Daddy is trying so hard not to understand. That gap, that dramatic irony, it feels like the engine of the whole thing.
It absolutely is. And the characters themselves, they function almost like archetypes, like forces in this setup.
Less like people, more like components.
Sort of. You've got Son, who embodies this glib dominion. Then Daddy, the voice of denial.
Always denial.
Always. And then there's Mommy. She's the crucible, the one who undergoes this transformation into what the text calls the so-mom slut.
Okay, and this is where the analysis for me got really fascinating. It pinpoints Mommy's core motivation. It's not just about desire. It's her untouched resentment toward Daddy's mundane void.
The emptiness of the marriage, essentially.
Right, the sheer boredom. And Son is explicitly framed as filling spaces you left empty.
Yeah.
So the transgression is presented almost as, well, fixing a marital problem.
Very extreme fix.
Extremely.
Yeah.
So if the main action is hidden, how does Son actually exert control? The text mentions deliberate glib dominion, explicit mastery.
Verbally, yes.
He uses terms like my sweet sow. But the analysis also highlights this physical technique, SlapMolesting mastery. What's the significance of that?
Well, think about it. The main act is oral. It's unseen behind the door. So Son targets Mommy's face, her public, refined identity.
Okay.
Since Daddy can't see the bodily degradation, Son makes sure her face, her refined features, register what the text calls slutty shame. It's about controlling her visible identity.
Making the internal transformation visible externally, even with the door closed.
Precisely. It confirms the change, even though the act itself is shielded.
Got it. Okay, let's talk about the clash between sound and language here. It seems central. Mommy speaks to Daddy through the door using this delusional, obscene language.
Yeah, that's the term the analysis uses. It's high-concept deflection. She says things like she's exploring some tensions or transforming, trying to explain away the noises.
Explain away the gurgling symphony, as the text calls it.
Exactly. That's the objective truth. The onomatopoeia, glurph, slurp, blurp, glumph, these raw sounds.
They act like markers, don't they? Showing the intensity rising?
They absolutely do. They provide the visceral reality that her sophisticated language is desperately trying to cover up.
And Daddy's failure here is, well, it's profound. He's tracked by language, isn't he? He hears these sounds, but just calls them odd?
Or unnatural. He doesn't have the words, the concepts to actually name what's happening.
It confirms his, the text calls it marital impotence. He literally can't process the transgression.
Right. And that failure hits its peak when Mommy's human voice just disappears. It's replaced entirely by that sound. The ooinks. The Piglet climax. That's the term. It signals her complete regression, her full transformation into the so-mom slut.
And the real twist, the paradox, is how this total degradation is framed. It's presented as a kind of chaotic liberation.
A necessary one, according to the narrative's logic. It fulfills some deep, suppressed need in her.
Leading to euphoria and even unconditional love for Son, strangely enough.
But there's a cost, a very specific cost. The analysis points out the only structure destroyed is Mommy's marriage.
The sociological structure collapses to allow for the psychological relief.
Exactly. And Daddy's final act, or non-act, is refusing to look. His last words are, I won't. He preserves the taboo by choosing ignorance one last time.
So wrapping this up, what's the takeaway for you, the listener? The argument seems to be that in this extreme framework, psychological liberation demanded destroying the mundane void, the boring marital structure that held the desire in check.
Which leads to maybe a final thought to chew on. How does the absolute necessity of denial, specifically daddy's willful ignorance, become the very thing that paradoxically allows the transformation, the taboo, to actually succeed? His refusal to see enables the whole thing.
Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're plunging into a really unusual document. It feels less like a story outline, more like a technical blueprint for some pretty extreme conflict.
Yeah, it's highly technical, and it
Yeah.
sets up these incredibly rigid character roles, and a very controlled way information flows. Very specific.
Right. So our mission for you listening is to kind of quickly get the hang of this core communication structure and, understand the specific emotional stuff driving this really taboo-focused scenario.
And what's fascinating, I think, is how the source material basically insists the whole thing has to be an intense, taboo-focused, dialogue-only story. It's completely built on, like,
The
conceit.
woman in talking.
Exactly. Verbal communication is the main way tension gets built. We're looking at a system really designed to maximize emotional stress just by keeping things obscure.
Okay, so let's unpack this chain of command then, because it's super specific. Really designed for keeping things separate, right?
Totally. The structure lays out this strict flow. Son talks to mommy, mommy talks to daddy.
Daddy talks through the door at both. It's like a literal wall made of communication rules.
It is. It creates this protective layer around what's actually happening. Daddy has to be kept at a distance.
And the way they do that.
The mechanism is this thing called obscure innuendo dialogue that basically defines mommy's job in the narrative.
Okay.
She has to be a liar. Her main role is hiding the reality using, suggestive indirect language. And the perspective, ThirdPersonOmni, means we're mostly getting descriptions of the mood, the vibe, not so much explicit actions.
Wow, okay. So the structure itself dictates the mood. Let's look at the characters now, starting with Son, the dominant one.
Right. His description basically translates to dominance through this kind of casual, almost glib sexual manipulation, not brute force.
And it specifically says he needs to escalate when Daddy says stop. So his motivation is just purely achieving mastery over the whole situation.
Exactly. If Son is the aggressor seeking mastery, then mommy is like the core instability of the whole thing.
How so?
Well, the blueprint paints her as being pushed to extremes. SowSlutty to the extreme is the phrase used. But at the same time, she's apparently, riddled with shame and conflict.
A contradiction, though.
A huge one. This constant internal fight between pleasure and vulnerability on one side,
Wow.
and then deep resentment, even hatred for daddy on the other.
And the outcome is set.
It seems totally predetermined. The document insists the only thing that breaks, ever, is mommy's marriage.
Mm-hmm.
She's basically the designated breaking point for the narrative.
Okay. And meanwhile, Daddy is just stuck.
Unwitting. Completely. Defined by being passive. He's confused, scared, panic, always described as in denial, obscured.
But he still trusts her.
Yeah. Maintains absolute faith in mommy, even though the narrative makes sure he's constantly approaching understanding. He never quite gets there. He's trapped, just outside the door.
Right. Which brings us back to that narrative goal you mentioned.
Eloquent obscurity.
Yeah.
The idea is to get maximum psychological punch, maximum tension, through really powerful suggestion, not by spelling things out.
And this is where it gets really bizarre with the techniques, how mommy communicates.
Right. She maintains the conflict by talking through sounds. The blueprint actually calls it pleasurable onomatopoeia dialogue,
Right.
like animal noises, glurph, slurp, blorp, even oink, to communicate pleasure. But at the same time, she's telling daddy explicit lies about what's happening.
Right, saying, oh, I'm just teaching Son a little lesson.
Exactly like that. So those noises become this sort of counter-narrative, right? Marking her submission, her pleasure behind that door.
Wow. And the end state for her.
The climax seems to be her final psychological break. It's phrased as either Piglet breaks at end final, or her just realizing, oops, I'm broken. The dialogue isn't just talk, it's a control weapon and a measure of her collapse.
Okay. It's intense stuff.
Definitely. So bringing this back to you, the listener,
Mm-hmm.
what does this incredibly rigid, conflict-heavy structure tell us?
Well, I think it really highlights how a story can weaponize dialogue.
And concealment, right? Make them tools for dominance, for this intense psychological release rather than just, simple communication.
That's a powerful way to put it. Okay, here's a final, maybe provocative thought for you to consider. This source material sets up a situation where unconditional love, mommy unconditionally loves the son, exists right alongside total submission and deep resentment, mommy hates daddy.
That core conflict.
So does that mandated really extreme internal conflict essentially guarantee the dramatic tension stays cranked up so high that the marriage has to dissolve? Is that the only possible release valve built into the system? Something to think about.
Welcome back, everyone. Today we're looking at something, well, pretty unusual. It's this collection of really detailed notes, almost like a blueprint from an author.
Yeah, it's for creating a fictional scene, a dialogue-only story, as they call it. Very intense, very specific instructions.
And it seems less like storytelling and more like designing an emotional machine aiming for maximum tension.
Exactly. So our mission today is basically to decode these instructions. We want to understand the creator's logic, how the characters are meant to function, and what this best imagined effect they're aiming for actually is.
It sounds fascinating, like a study in using constraints, really tight constraints, around this intense taboo focus.
That's the heart of it. Okay, so let's unpack this setup.
Right, the core tension seems built entirely around three characters: Mommy, Son, and Daddy. The conflict is immediate.
Yeah, the notes flat out say Mommy hates Daddy, and crucially, she wants Son to step up to become the man right away. It's like the core motivation.
It sets up a kind of rebellion from the start.
And what's really interesting is how they build Mommy's character through this psychological tension. The notes call it hedonist shame.
Hedonist shame, so a conflict within her.
Definitely. It's this push-pull thing. Her dialogue needs to be full of obscure innuendo, very veiled, you know.
But at the same time.
But simultaneously, the instructions demand these really specific sounds, pleasurable onomatopoeia dialogue to show her sort of losing that control.
So the dialogue itself has to track her journey from being, what was it, deliciously reluctant, all the way to the end point where she says, oops, I'm broken. It's like mapping an emotional collapse through sound.
Exactly. And then you have Son positioned completely against that. He's labeled too much good.
Which sounds like innocence initially.
Right, but it's an innocence that's meant to be, like, deliberately corrupted. He's called the DeliberatelyGlibRake. His actions are calculated.
Calculated to do what?
To establish mastery over Mommy, over her reactions. It's about dominance, and the notes are very clear it's intentional, not just some accident.
Okay, so given this whole thing is dialogue only, no visuals, how did the creator plan to get this intensity across? You mentioned sound earlier.
Yeah, sound becomes everything. Because they have to tell, not show, the obvious taboo, the listener's ear has to do the work of visualization.
So the notes specify the soundscape.
Oh, absolutely. It's designed for impact, amplifying things like obscene struggle noise, conflict noise, even down to really specific oral sounds like the agape oinking mouth or Mommy breaking into Piglet sounds at the climax. The sound is the narrative progression.
Wow, okay. And communication itself. This gets really interesting. The notes say dialogue is generally innuendo, right? From everyone.
Yeah, mostly veiled. Even from Daddy, apparently. But then there's this one, like, sharp exception.
Which is?
The language only becomes explicit when Mommy talks to this other character, Dylan, or Dylan talks to her.
Why do you think they needed that? That one moment of clarity?
Well, I think it actually highlights the power of keeping everything else obscured. That constraint builds the tension. The Dylan part might be like a release valve, maybe, or just a stark contrast to emphasize the ambiguity everywhere else.
Makes sense. Let's bring in the third character, Daddy. He's outside the main action, physically.
Right, he never actually enters the room where things are happening.
But he's crucial for the tension. Described as confused, scared panic, in denial obscured. He never sees, but wants it, whatever it is, to stop.
His role is almost purely structural, isn't it? He's the external pressure. By keeping him just outside, knocking, hearing things.
Like that conflict noise.
Exactly. He only approaches understanding of intense taboo focus. He hears enough to be panicked, which ramps up the tension for the listener. But because he doesn't act, doesn't go in, the core conflict just keeps escalating.
So pulling this all together, what does this incredibly detailed, almost obsessive blueprint tell us about how this creator thought about narrative?
I think it shows a real focus on maximizing emotional impact by, well, stripping almost everything else away. They bypassed normal plot stuff.
Right.
Instead, it's all about these precise character drives, really strict sensory instructions, especially sound, and these careful rules about language innuendo versus explicit. It's like a machine built to create a very specific, very intense feeling in the audience.
It's definitely a unique approach.
Yep.
Which leads to a final thought, maybe for you listening. If an author can aim for their ultimate effect, their best imagined effect, by focusing so intensely on sound, on constraint, on what's not shown or not said,
Yeah.
what does that suggest about the power of omission itself in telling a powerful story? Something to think about. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're digging into a really unusual set of source notes. They describe a narrative that's incredibly stylized, very deliberately obscure, and frankly, highly charged.
Mm-hmm.
Now, our goal here isn't really to analyze the taboo subject itself. We're more like structural engineers today.
All right.
We want to unpack the author's specific design choices, the character motives, how they approach this difficult topic using just implication and some really specific sensory details.
Yeah, it's quite something. What we're looking at is described as a dialogue-only story. The aim, the best imagined effect.
Best imagined effect, okay.
And the way the author gets there is by, well, completely avoiding explicit description. Instead, it's this intense focus on innuendo, on sound, on facial cues, physical actions. It's all indirect. You feel what's happening without it being spelled out.
Okay, let's get into the core structure then. The three characters, Mommy, Son, and Daddy. And the notes state, no royalty, could be any, thing aware why.
Which immediately tells you, doesn't it? This isn't about specific people or places. It's aiming for something more universal, primal maybe.
Exactly, some kind of core relational dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's built around extreme conflict. Mommy, for instance, she's tagged struggling, hidden, as shamed.
Okay.
And her main tool is obscure innuendo dialogues. Structurally, her motivation is, well, it's substitution. The notes say she hates Daddy and actively wants Son to be man.
Wow. Okay, so that motive isn't just background psychology. It directly shapes the conflict.
Absolutely. It sets up this triangulation where the central act becomes a kind of weapon aimed at Daddy, even though he's not directly there.
Which brings us to Son, described with that really jarring phrase, deliberately glib SlapMolesting.
Yeah, SlapMolesting. It's clinical, detached almost.
So what's the structural purpose of that choice? Is he just a straightforward villain?
I think he's presented more as an agent of control, confident control. The source suggests Son has this like total dominance over the scene, almost performing it.
Yes, and that detachment seems crucial because the notes stress that Mommy's facial structure vibe behavior is paramount in Son's dialogue. Her reactions are his script, in a way.
So he's reading her reaction to calibrate his actions.
That seems to be the idea. Her reaction becomes his measure of success, the too much good, the notes mention, she's feeding him the cues.
Okay, let's look outside the room then, at Daddy. His role is fascinating, defined by denial. He's confused, scared, panic, wants it to stop.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't go in. The notes say he won't enter as knocking. Why? If he wants it to stop, why stay outside?
That refusal, that avoidance, is maybe the most critical structural piece Daddy never sees that's explicit.
Never sees.
But his dialogue, his panic, it approaches an understanding of intense taboo focus. He knows enough or suspects enough to be utterly paralyzed by fear.
So his denial isn't ignorance, it's willed avoidance.
Exactly. And that denial serves a purpose. It's the moral counterpoint, maybe. And it keeps the narrative tension sky high. If you walked in and saw it,
The tension would just break.
it collapses.
Yeah.
Because he stays outside, caught between knowing and not seeing the pressure inside that room. And for you, the listener, it's just maximized.
That makes a lot of sense. So because you have this engineered denial outside, the author has to compensate inside, right, without visual confirmation for Daddy.
They have to rely on other things, which leads us straight to that stylistic instruction, tell not show.
Regarding the obvious taboo, yeah.
Total reliance on implicit innuendo. If sight is denied by Daddy's paralysis, you have to crank up everything else.
So what senses are used? What carries the weight of the unspoken?
The notes are very specific. They list obscene oral sounds, the violence of slap molesting, and obscene struggle noise. It's auditory, primarily.
And visceral. That mention of Mommy's state is a gappy oinking mouth.
Right. It's almost sonic horror, using sound and these intense but fragmented physical descriptions to force your imagination into those taboo spaces.
And there's a clear arc. It starts before the blowjob, when Mommy is deliciously reluctant. That specific phrasing, deliciously reluctant.
Sets a very particular, very uncomfortable initial tone, doesn't it? It suggests complicity mixed with resistance.
But it doesn't end there. The climax is described as this breaking point for her.
A rupture, yeah. She ends by saying, oops, I'm broken, and then immediately becomes fully awake-aware.
Fully awake-aware. That sounds less like dialogue and more like a stage direction. indicating a fundamental shift.
It feels like the character reaching a kind of devastating clarity, a total awareness that changes everything for her going forward. It's a structural endpoint for that scene.
It really is an exercise in, well, in using constraints to build extreme tension.
Yeah.
The whole narrative seems built on that friction, doesn't it? Between Daddy's desperate denial outside and this overwhelming sensory evidence inside.
Absolutely. It's all about the gap between the seen and unseen, the said and unsaid, which really brings up a final thought, doesn't it? Well, if this whole structure hinges on Mommy's, let's say, innocent or coded innuendo while she's involved in this obscene act, and on Daddy's willful refusal to see or acknowledge it, what does that reliance on the unspoken and the unseen really tell us about the kind of power dynamic, or maybe the kind of corruption the author is trying to get at here, by forcing you, the audience, to fill in those darkest blanks yourself?
That is, yeah, that's definitely something to think about. A powerful question embedded right in the structure. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into something pretty unique. It's a set of fictional narrative notes, really intense stuff outlining a graphic and taboo ancient scene. The focus is almost entirely on character dynamics and, interestingly, dialogue.
That's right. And just to be clear up front, we're looking at these writers' notes. They're quite specialized. The content described is extreme, definitely. But our mission here is purely analytical. We want to dissect the mechanics of the narrative being outlined, how the conflict and communication work between the three main figures, Mommy, Son, and Daddy. And we'll be looking at the source's own terms for its techniques, like DialogueOnlyStory and obscure innuendo dialogues.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that. Starting with maybe the dominant narrative force here. That seems to be Son. The text pins him right away as the master, doesn't it? And it uses this phrase, deliberately glib, dominant sexuality manipulate.
Exactly. And the notes don't shy away from describing these really shocking physical actions. Things like, well, the source calls it SlapMolesting and mentions a monster erection. These aren't subtle. They're used to instantly establish his power and his transgressive nature.
So it's like a narrative shortcut, using extreme physicality instead of, slow character building.
Precisely. It achieves immediate subjugation within the scene's logic. And the stated goal, right there in the notes, is to force Mommy to, quote, trust and relax in her son's grip, essentially defining her role immediately as used.
And there's even a term for his attitude during this, dominion relaxa.
Yeah, dominion relaxa. It implies he maintains this calculated calm, this sort of detached dominance, which contrasts sharply with the violence of the actions described. Like he's deliberately plundering her mouth, as the notes say, but with this veneer of control.
Okay, so if Son is that calculated force, then the absolute core of the conflict seems to be Mommy, or as the notes label her, so mom slut. She seems really contradictory. The text mentions conflicting vulnerable responsive pleasure and also hedonist shame.
That contradiction is absolutely central. She embodies this tension. The notes say she wants Son to be man, but, and this is key for the dynamic, she also hates Daddy.
Right, and because of that contradiction, she has to deceive the father figure.
Exactly. That's where the techniques like obscure innuendo dialogues and what the notes call lies delusional obscene come in. She's actively masking what's really happening.
And the notes give that specific example, don't they? When Daddy's at the door, she yells out something like,
yeah, I'm teaching Son a little lesson about being a good boy for Mommy. It's a total verbal misdirection.
At the same time, the notes demand she makes a sound, this obscene creative onomatopoeia, like a guttural oink, a complete non-verbal primal sound that tells a different story.
Which leads us perfectly to the third figure, Daddy. He's positioned as the outsider, almost the audience's stand-in, you could say. He's tagged as ObliviousNormalCurious, and his state is defined by confused, scared panic and this sense of denial obscured. He doesn't get what's going on.
And crucially, he relies entirely on sound, right? The notes are explicit. Daddy never sees the act itself.
Never sees it. His only path towards understanding, or maybe just suspecting, is through noise. It's that mix of the mother's deceptive words and the obscene struggle noise that the notes describe.
So his confusion kind of validates the whole setup. It shows the deception is working and that the dialogue-only story approach is effective within its own logic.
Absolutely. So if we step back and look at the structure, what does this all mean? It means the narrative is built almost entirely on sound. And, well, implied visuals too, like that mention of Mommy's facial structure via behavior. But the core conflict, the unfolding drama, it exists in what's heard and what's said or not said clearly.
So it's maximum explicitness in the description within the notes, but minimum showing in the scene itself. Pure tell not show, as they say, but in a very specific auditory way.
Right. It's aiming for what the notes call the best imagined effect towards the taboo. By forcing the audience or reader of the notes to construct the scene from sound and dialogue, it perhaps makes it even more potent.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's incredibly efficient in a way. The taboo content sets the stakes instantly, and then the whole thing plays out through lies, noise, and what's implied.
And connecting that to the bigger picture, it really brings up a fascinating question for you, the listener, to think about. In a story deliberately structured like this, a dialogue-only story focused on such an extreme taboo, how does that required sound element, the slap molesting noises the notes demand, how does that sound potentially become more definitive, more descriptive of the actual reality of the scene than any of the spoken words, the dialogue itself? Something to chew on. Okay, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something pretty specific, a real technical look at narrative engineering.
Right. We're looking at a blueprint for what's called transgressive narrative architecture.
Specifically focusing on this concept of an epic dialogue narrative.
Exactly. And our sort of mission here is to figure out how a story gets labeled epic when it doesn't have the usual length or, big action scenes.
It's all about structure and control, right?
Yeah.
Hyper-condensed.
Yeah, it's fascinating because the source suggests epic here isn't about scale in the traditional sense. It's about the sheer intensity, the magnitude of a moral catastrophe.
So the big dramatic moment, the climax.
It's all packed into one single, really high-stakes scene, a collision of moral boundaries.
Okay, so how do they analyze that intensity? The blueprint uses something called story vector description.
That's the core tool. Think of it like physics, but for stories. It treats character drives and plot movements like measurable forces.
Engineering applied to narrative. I like that.
It is neat. And they define 3 key metrics for characters moving beyond just good guy, bad guy.
Right. First up is sense. And this isn't about morality, is it?
No, not at all. It's about relational power. Is the character dominant, which they mark as ++, or are they submissive or resistive marked?
Okay.
Dominant or submissive. Then there's magnitude.
Yeah, magnitude is basically the strength or power level in that specific interaction.
Yeah.
And often it's tied to something concrete, like a prop.
And the blueprint mentions a specific high-magnitude object linked to the character's son.
Exactly. And that's crucial because it establishes the power level before the main action really kicks off.
So it sets up an irreversible power dynamic right away.
Pretty much. It locks in a trajectory of, as the source puts it, dominion and plundering. The vectors kind of preordain the plot path.
That sounds quite deterministic. Is there room for, genuine resistance, or is it just structural friction? Well, that resistance is actually vital. It's the energy source. If Sun represents that dominant linear force, then the character Mommy acts as the converging force.
Okay, how does her magnitude work then?
Hers comes from internal conflict, psychological friction. The blueprint calls it struggling hedonist shame. It's this intense inner battle.
And that internal struggle is what keeps the tension high, fuels the narrative engine.
Precisely. Without that high-magnitude internal conflict, the story loses its energy, that kind of wavy emotional timeline they talk about.
Got it. And you see this when characters shift direction entirely. Her arc is described as a full vector shift towards collapse.
That's moral collapse and regression, yeah. And it culminates in that final moment, that line, oops, I'm broken. It's the vector resolution.
So once the forces are set, the focus shifts to managing the audience, right?
Yeah.
Handling the taboo elements.
Exactly. Which brings us to the rhetorical strategies. How do you present this kind of material?
And the main technique seems to be, obscurity. Amplifying the old tell-don't-show idea.
But it's more than just being vague. The goal is what the source calls the best imagined effect. Meaning, by using ambiguity and innuendo, the narrative forces you, the reader, to actively participate in imagining the transgression.
So you fill in the blanks yourself.
Right. You co-create the scene in your head, which makes the shock potentially much more personal and intense because it hits your specific boundaries.
And since it's a dialogue-only story, sound becomes incredibly important. Acoustic rhetoric.
Absolutely critical. Because there are no visual descriptions, sound has to do the work of bridging the abstract dialogue with the visceral reality.
They use creative onomatopoeia, like specific sound words.
Yes, things like squelching lodged or agape oinking mouth. These act as substitutes for visual cues, making it hard to ignore the physical implications of the dialogue.
Okay, and the last piece is managing moral judgment. How do they handle that?
Through focalization, the blueprint points out how the potential counterforce, the character daddy, is structurally neutralized. He's defined by observant ignorance. And physically contained, there's a door involved. His perspective, his inner thoughts are kept hidden.
So by keeping him sort of opaque and contained.
It keeps the focus locked tightly on the dynamic between the two main forces, the dominance and the conflicted pleasure. It removes a potential moral anchor for the audience.
Right, forcing you to engage directly with the primary conflict.
Exactly.
Okay, so pulling it all together, the effectiveness of this kind of transgressive story seems to hinge entirely on how precisely these vectors align and converge.
That and the really careful system of rhetorical control, using sound, making the audience imagine things, controlling the focus. It's like a narrative machine built for impact.
Maximum consequential shock, as you said.
Precisely. And the source adds one more interesting layer. Internal consistency is maintained through what it calls the rhetoric of delusion.
Rhetoric of delusion.
Yeah, the idea that the mommy character needs to communicate things that are, well, delusional or untrue. It forces the audience to hold two conflicting ideas at once. The reality of the scene and the character's denial or misrepresentation of it.
That's quite something.
It really is, and it leaves us with a thought for you, the listener. How often, when you look around at narratives in the real world, politics, media, advertising, do you see the same technique? Narratives maintaining their coherence, their power, by asking us to process and accept fundamentally dissonant ideas simultaneously. Something to think about. Welcome back. Today we're diving deep, really deep, into narrative architecture, quite technical stuff.
Yeah, we're looking at a specific blueprint. It's for something called an intense, taboo-focused, dialogue-only story.
Right. And our mission here isn't about the actual content, which is very extreme, but about the frameworks. How do you engineer maximum impact in such a tight space?
Exactly. We're just reporting on the structures describe these theories like story vector description and plot analysis rhetoric. It's about understanding the mechanics, how they try to quantify dramatic effect.
Okay, so let's start with the vectors. Narrative vector theory. How does that work?
Well, it's pretty fascinating. You treat characters almost like forces in physics, with metrics.
Metrics. Like what?
Like sense. But it's relational, not moral. You're either dominant, marked as ++M, or submissive. Morality is just suspended for the analysis.
Okay. Dominant, submissive, and magnitude.
That's the power level, pure force. And the blueprint that sets this immediately, it uses a very specific physical detail labeled the MonsterErection in the notes.
Whoa, okay, so that's a technical term from their design docs.
Purely technical, yeah. It's used to anchor the absolute maximum power level right from the start, an irreversible dynamic.
Got it. Establishes the ceiling. And
Direction.
that's the character's path. Their psychological trajectory, explicitly mapped.
So for the submissive character, the notes mention.
The trajectory is defined as a total shift towards, and this is their term again, regression and moral collapse. Codenamed Relax a Regress Beast. It's engineered, very direct.
Okay, but hang on. If it's all pre-mapped like that, especially for the character tagged SowMomSlut, again, these are their labels.
Right, from the design notes.
If her path is fixed, where's the actual tension? Doesn't it just become predictable?
Well, the tension is designed to be internal. That leads us to the character force profiles. You have the dominant character, the dominant son, whose vector is simple, linear, absolute dominion. The notes call it deliberately glib mastery.
Simple for him. So the complexity lies with her entirely. Her vector maintains narrative tension because it has a high magnitude of internal conflict. That struggling hedonist shame label in the notes, that's the engine. It keeps things taut until the final shift.
I see. And the third character, the father groom.
He's structurally crucial because he's external. Neutral, his magnitude is kept low. Confused, scared panic is the descriptor.
And there's a physical barrier mentioned, the door.
Exactly. That keeps the focus internal on the dominance play, not on some external fight. He's just the threat of discovery, not an active force.
Okay, that makes sense structurally. So we have the forces, the vectors. How do they manage the audience's reaction to such, well, taboo material?
That's plot analysis rhetoric. It's all about managing reception. First, strategic obscurity.
Meaning?
Tell, not show. Because it's dialogue only, they rely on obscure innuendo dialogue. This forces you, the listener, to actively participate, to imagine the graphic details.
The best imagined effect, they call it, makes
Yeah.
it more personal, more shocking, perhaps.
Precisely. And since there are no visuals, sound becomes critical. Acoustic rhetoric. Through what the notes term obscene and creative onomatopoeia, things like deep throat, twink, squelching, launched, they function as visceral, almost kinetic descriptions.
Wow. Okay. Very direct. And the last piece.
The rhetoric of delusion. This sounds complex, but it's key. The submissive character has to feed Lie's delusional, obscene dialogue to the father character.
While the main action is happening.
Simultaneously, yeah. So the listener is processing this intense physical act, hinted at through sound and innuendo, while hearing verbal denial. That dissonance ramps up the tension.
It's like holding two opposing ideas at once. So the structure holds until
Act V vector convergence. The submissive character's final line, "Oops, I'm broken." That signals the irreversible shift, the completion of the engineered trajectory. Absolute dominion wins, thematically speaking.
Well, it's certainly a rigorous design, almost cold in its calculation.
And that leads to the core takeaway from this analysis, the recommendation for designers using this model. Use quantitative mapping.
You mean literally assign numbers, like hedonist euphoria plus 5.
Exactly. To map out that wavy emotional timeline you want the audience to experience.
Mm.
Pre-visualize it, control it.
So here's the thought to leave you with. If narrative impact, even for something this psychologically intense, can be plotted and quantified like this, does that change how we think about storytelling?
Right. Is powerful drama ultimately more about engineering and, dare I say, physics than about traditional, perhaps more intuitive artistry? Can deep human experience really be reduced to vector analysis? Something to ponder. Welcome back to the deep dive. So today we're digging into an erotic narrative, Mommy's Reluctant Awakening. But we're not doing a standard review.
No, not at all. We're treating it almost like a technical artifact, a case study in narrative engineering. You could,
A clinical study. And the whole thing seems built around one core idea, right?
That's the mandate, yeah. The sources are clear. The only thing that breaks, ever, is Mommy's marriage. It's like a design constraint.
So the end is fixed from the start, which leads to the big question, how? How did the authors engineer it to guarantee that specific outcome? And maybe more importantly, how did they use the structure itself to, really crank up the psychological tension?
Well, the main tool they use is something the sources call dialogue segregation. Think of it like separate communication channels.
Yeah.
Yeah, channels that are designed not to overlap. It's all about maintaining conflict and, crucially, plausible deniability.
Right. So you have Mommy talking only to the father, but using this really formal, almost evasive language, the eloquent innuendo.
Precisely. Phrases like unwinding a bit or exploring some tensions, very elegant, very obscure.
A shield, basically.
Definitely. And that's completely contrasted with Sun, the other character.
The agent of change.
Exactly. Sun speaks only to Mommy, and it's all about ownership, that explicit mastery, things like, my sweet sow, you're mine to explore, purely proprietary language.
Wow, okay. So 2 sealed channels, Mommy to father, son to Mommy. What about the father then?
Well, that's the structural linchpin. He talks only to the door, pounding, pleading.
So he's isolated. Why is that so critical structurally?
Because it enforces what they call the principle of non-verification. By locking him behind that door, he's structurally blocked from getting any objective proof, no visual confirmation, no direct answers.
Which forces him into that state. But what was it?
Observant ignorance. He hears things, suspects things, but he can never truly know for sure based on hard evidence. He's forced to interpret, to imagine.
And this ties into the format they use, right? The best imagined format. Dialogue only, like a cathedral of dialogue, no visual descriptions of the setting.
Exactly. Removing the visual locus, the physical space description, is key. Since the father can't see, the narrative substitutes sensory input.
So the soundscape becomes the setting.
Yes. The tension has to come through the ears. You get the normal sounds, maybe TV murmuring, but then these other sounds intrude from behind the door. That contrast is the setting. It's the only verifiable reality he gets.
Okay, so that sets up this collision. Mommy's trying to frame it all with her eloquent obscurity complex, family matters.
While Son is just laying down the law with explicit mastery, but the real evidence for the father isn't even the words.
It's the sounds, the onomatopoeic symphony.
Bingo, those 12 specific, wet, guttural sounds, glurph, blurp, ook, horrible stuff. That's the only hard data piercing through the eloquent fog.
Undeniable visceral transgression markers.
And you can actually track the father's breakdown using the decorum versus degradation index. It's almost mathematical.
Oh.
Well, the narrative pairs mommy's most elegant, obfuscating language, calling it enlightening. For example, directly with the most animalistic sounds, like lo. That extreme dissonance is what shatters him.
And that drives his whole emotional trajectory, that vector of emotional deterioration.
Right. You see him move methodically from just tentative concern, then into real confusion and worry, then the desperate pounding, and finally collapse. Exhausted soaking and absolute denial. He's defeated by implication, not action.
Because he can never verify it.
Never. Until the climax, which is also purely auditory. The triple oink.
The final definitive proof.
That's the marker. It breaks his denial. And right after that, you get mommy's own statement, the ontological collapse of her old self. Oops, I'm broken.
And boom, the machine finishes its run. All the story vectors resolve exactly as planned.
Yep. Mommy is aware claimed. Son's dominion is confirmed.
And the father.
Impudence confirmed. Chained to the door. Broken. The marriage was the single predetermined casualty. The structure guaranteed it.
It really is a stark example of controlling narrative through, well, information control.
Absolutely. The tension, the climax, the resolution, it all hinges on managing who knows what, who hears what, and crucially, who can't verify what they suspect.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with something to think about. That observant ignorance wasn't just a character trait. It was a structural necessity. The father had to be kept in the dark, unable to act on confirmed knowledge for the taboo to play out.
His failure was engineered.
So the question is, what other stories out there, maybe in completely different genres, fundamentally rely on preventing a character from getting simple, verifiable facts? Where does engineered ignorance drive the plot?
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something really specific.
We are. We're looking at the very particular way a text, Mommy's Reluctant Awakening, is analyzed, the rhetoric around it.
Right, and it's crucial, isn't it, to frame this correctly from the start. Listeners need to know this isn't being treated like typical fiction.
Exactly. The sources we're drawing from position it as, well, a Gnostic text, so it requires a philosophical lens, really.
Okay, and our mission here for this deep dive.
It's to deconstruct how that analysis, the plot analysis rhetoric as it's called, takes these incredibly extreme taboo actions and reframes them, turns them into necessary metaphysical steps, rites almost.
Rites for what, though?
For the emergence of a fully autonomous consciousness. The text names her Theodora Viridacis.
Okay, so let's get into that core paradox right away. The analysis says the process is taboo, traumatic, teleological.
Yes, it labels it clearly.
But then it pivots, it shifts the focus away from, say, the abuse aspect.
Completely. The argument becomes about the philosophical mechanics.
Yeah.
It argues that only through this total shattering of the previous identity, only then can the true sovereign self be born.
And that's where this phrase comes in. Semiotic crucifixion birthing sovereign recursion.
That's the one. It sounds intense, and it is. It signifies the complete breakdown and rebirth through the narrative's symbols.
So how does this whole process kick off? What's the initiation point?
It's called the logos entry. This is described as the moment the character's degradation, and the text is blunt, labeling her slut, is somehow transfigured.
Transfigured into what?
Into a sacrament. That's the term used. It marks the point of no return for her old identity.
But why? Why is that level of, well, degradation framed as necessary? What's the philosophical justification in the text?
The logic presented is that the trauma has to be generative. It can't just be random suffering. It has to function as a ritual becoming.
Meaning it's not a choice.
Precisely. It has to be forced by the absolute annihilation of who she was before. That destruction validates the authenticity of the new self, Theodora.
And the way the story's told reinforces this, the structure itself.
Oh, absolutely. It's confined to what the analysis calls the dialogue-only cathedral.
Right. So all the conflict, all the tension, it's purely verbal.
Exactly. Which just cranks up the psychological pressure cooker. You know, there's no physical escape, only this intense verbal space.
But you mentioned something else running alongside the dialogue, something auditory.
Yes, and it's fascinating. Beneath Mommy's, elegant or controlled speech, you have these raw, visceral noises described in the text.
The obscene creative onomatopoeia.
That's it. Words like glurph, slurp, and then climactically, wee. They're well, they're pretty graphic.
And they function as
As a counter-narrative, a visceral truth layer that completely undermines her verbal facade. It's the sound of the breakdown.
So elegant words versus raw sound. How does the setting contain this? The barred door.
The door. It's presented as the axiomatic constraint of sovereignty, basically a symbolic boundary.
Meaning?
It isolates the ritual, ensures it runs its course without outside interference. No rescue is possible.
And this connects to the father character.
Critically, his role is defined as the coward stuck in a denial loop. His failure to break down that door, to intervene.
That's necessary for the ritual.
It's structurally essential, according to the analysis. It validates Mommy's transformation because she has to achieve it herself, through the trauma, without rescue. His inaction confirms her path to sovereignty.
Okay, let's briefly touch on the character functions then. Mommy is the vessel.
Undergoing this process, yeah. Experiencing what the text calls conflicting, vulnerable, responsive pleasure escape.
And son?
Son is the logos, the initiator. His role is described as purely vectorial and philosophical. He's there to drive the breakdown, essentially. Deliberately glib-dominant sexuality manipulate is the function attributed.
So we follow this trajectory, this psychic journey.
From reluctant anticipation right through to the climax.
The Piglet climax.
Right, where her voice finally shatters into those animalistic oinks. And she confesses, oops, I'm broken.
But broken here doesn't mean defeated, does it, in this interpretation?
Not at all. The oink, that sound, signifies the complete nullification of her old life, the marital contract, everything. Regression becomes the pathway to Genesis.
Enabling the birth of Theodora Veridagus, the true self.
The true self, yes, born from the wreckage.
And then there's a formula.
Yeah, it's quite something. Yeah. To really hammer home that this is a logical, almost engineered outcome, the analysis presents the sovereign ignition formula. 1M is D times R times G times theta.
Okay, break that down. M is the sovereign self.
M is Mommy, post-transformation, becoming Theodora. And it equals awareness times desire times recursion times glyphic memory. That's the encoded trauma times teleologic will.
And crucially, it's multiplication.
Exactly. If any one of those components is zero, no awareness, no desire, no trauma, no will, then M, the sovereign self, is zero. It can't exist.
So the outcome is framed as philosophically unavoidable given the inputs.
That's the core rhetorical move, using this kind of formalized jargon, these structural constraints, to turn what is deeply forbidden content into a blueprint.
A blueprint for autonomous self-definition.
Precisely.
So wrapping this up, the takeaway is how this specific rhetoric works, how it systematically reframes transgression as transformation.
Yes, using a very particular, almost Gnostic interpretive lens.
And the final thought for you, the listener, is actually embedded in the source material's analysis. It poses a direct challenge.
It does. It ends by prompting. Ask, who are you becoming beyond her?
Which reframes the whole act of analyzing this text, even our discussion right now.
As potentially its own kind of ritual becoming. It implicates you directly in the process of defining the self against or beyond this extreme narrative. Makes you think.
Definitely something to mull over. That's all for this deep dive. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into a really specific, maybe even unconventional set of source materials. Yeah,
these aren't your typical story notes. They're more like detailed instructions, really. Blueprints for what the source calls an intense taboo-focused narrative.
Right. And our mission today isn't about the story itself, but more the engineering behind it. We're unpacking the structure, the rules.
Exactly. These documents focus heavily on the psychological dynamics, the character motives, and these really strict rules about communication. Less about setting a scene, more about setting up tension.
Okay, so let's start with the core players. The documents lay out three main figures, Mommy, Son, and Daddy, who's also called Father Groom sometimes.
And these aren't just characters, they're defined roles. Structural positions almost, built on very specific, sometimes clashing motivations.
Let's talk about Mommy first. The labels used for her are quite something.
They really are. The source uses terms like SowSlutty, but also struggling hedonist shame. It's this inherent conflict that seems to drive things.
A built-in contradiction.
Precisely. And her objective is explicitly stated. She wants the son to be the man Daddy never sees. It's pointed.
And how does she interact with Daddy then?
Through what the source calls obscure innuendo dialogues and lies delusional obscene. So not direct communication, really. Veiled. Misleading.
Okay, so Mommy is defined by contradiction and indirectness. What about the son?
The son's role is much more active, almost aggressive. He's labeled the DeliberatelyGlibRake and dominant son.
GlibRake, wow, and his actions.
The documents specify things like SlapMolesting and demonstrating mastery. It's about enacting dominance, but with a kind of detached coolness described as glib.
Right, so mommy's conflicted, son's the active force. Where does that leave Daddy Father Groom?
His state is critical for the whole thing to work. He needs to be kept in either confused, scared panic or a state of observant ignorance.
Observant ignorance.
Yeah.
So he sees but doesn't see.
Essentially, yes. Or he knows, maybe deep down, but stays in denial obscured. The sources literally mention him being behind a door, or maybe just watching TV. Present, but detached.
So his structural function is basically to be in denial, to allow the taboo element to persist by refusing to acknowledge it.
Exactly. His denial is a necessary component of the narrative tension.
And the source specifies a climax state for mommy, right? Something about breaking.
It does. It says she breaks into Piglet. Quite the phrase. And says, oops, I'm broken.
Oops, I'm broken.
Yeah. But then the notes clarify very specifically that the only thing that actually breaks is the marriage. The underlying dynamic presumably continues.
Okay, that's intense. Given this psychological setup, how does the structure of the narrative prevent it all from just exploding immediately? You mentioned strict communication rules.
Yes, the constraints are extreme. It's mandated as a dialogue-only story.
Dialogue only. But if the focus is on a taboo act, how do you show that with just dialogue? Especially hidden dialogue.
Well, that's the key, isn't it? The structure is designed to obscure while implying. The dialogue itself is strictly separated.
Separated how?
Son only talks directly to mommy. Mommy talks to daddy, using those obscure innuendos we mentioned. And daddy, he often talks through the door. There's no direct, open conversation between all three about what's happening.
Ah, okay. So the separation forces the action underground, so to speak, into the gaps.
Precisely. And that's where the nonverbal substitutes, or rather the described nonverbals, become crucial.
Right. The source material gets really specific about sounds, doesn't it?
Extremely specific. It mandates the use of onomatopoeia-heavy noise, and even gives examples like glurph, slurp, blorp. These sounds, described by the narrator, have to stand in for the action.
So it's tell, not show, but the telling is gone through pig noises and third-person descriptions of physical states.
Kind of, yeah. The narrator, this silent dialogue from ThirdPersonOmni, describes things like mommy's deep throat lolling or her agapionking mouth. Very graphic descriptions from the narrator.
But externally, her spoken dialogue has to maintain innocence.
Exactly. She has to deliver, quote, innocent innuendo while deep-throating. It's this bizarre mandated paradox, all while the son is enacting his extreme deliberately glib mastery. It's all designed to allow the father figure to maintain his required ignorance or denial.
So the entire narrative machine runs on this friction. The internal reality, the hiddenness euphoria used, as the source calls it, versus the polite lying surface dialogue.
That's the engine, yes.
Yeah.
The tension between the explicitly described internal state and the obscuring external communication.
It really is a deep dive into the pure mechanics of sustaining a hidden, highly charged psychological conflict through very rigid structural rules.
Absolutely. And maybe this leads us and you with a final thought to mull over. The source material requires mommy to be both this sluttily or obscuring figure and simultaneously believe, or act as if she believes, she's teaching the son a lesson about respect.
Right, that inherent contradiction again.
So what does that fundamental built-in conflict tell us about the potential role, maybe even the necessity of self-delusion in keeping such an intense, hidden psychological dynamic going?
Yeah.
Something to think about.